Good morning. It's Friday, February 7th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 490 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Well, the fallout continues from that press conference on Tuesday night with President Donald Trump calling for a U.S. takeover of the Gaza Strip. I used to joke that back in 1998, on the only visit I ever took to the Gaza Strip, that I went to the Club Med resort there. Well, now it looks like Donald Trump isn't joking, and the Arab states aren't laughing. They're all trashing the idea. So are the Europeans, for that matter. It's not hard to understand why. This is a major disruption of the status quo. But here's the thing, the status quo has been terrible. And I think Secretary of State Marco Rubio put it perfectly. He said that countries currently howling with disapproval should, quote, step up and find a solution, end quote. Kudos, Mr. Secretary. Well put. Now we wait for someone, anyone, to step up from the Arab world. Today's guest is Representative Jared Moskowitz, a Democrat from the great state of Florida. In this session of Congress, he's poised to tackle some of the thorniest foreign policy challenges we face, including the threat posed by the regime in Iran and even the lesser-known problem of South Africa's alignment with malign actors such as China and Russia. We caught up the other day for a pre-recorded interview, which we'll play for you in just a few minutes. I think you'll enjoy it. Egypt and Jordan are in meltdown mode after President Donald Trump dropped his day-after plan for Gaza. Both countries refused the president when he suggested they take in Palestinians while Gaza gets rebuilt. The two countries then slammed Trump after he announced that the United States could take control of the coastal enclave. Jordan's position is somewhat understandable. The country is 85% Palestinian, and it absorbed a flood of Syrian refugees from that country's civil war. But what's Egypt's beef? One could argue that Cairo can't afford to take in Palestinians. Their economy is in bad shape. But the problem runs way deeper. Here at FDD, we've been closely monitoring Egypt since the war began. Last year, massive smuggling tunnels were discovered beneath the border between Sinai and Gaza. In recent months, reports have circulated of an Egyptian military buildup in Sinai, evidently without the consent of the Israelis or the United States. On Monday, a video surfaced showing dozens of tanks lined up on the Egyptian side of Rafah. So let's forget about those refugees for a minute and ask, what the Heliopolis is going on over there? President Trump is right to try and shake things up in the Arab world and to get the region to think differently about Gaza. But here in Washington, we may need to think differently about Egypt. The White House needs to ask the tough questions and demand answers from Cairo about these recent military maneuvers. Nothing less than Israel's longest lasting regional peace agreement is at stake. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the Treasury Department imposed sanctions on an international network that's generating money for the Iranian military. This network transferred millions of barrels of Iranian crude to China. Those shipments were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They were also highly illegal. The designees included entities, individuals, and vessels scattered across the globe, including in China, India, and the United Arab Emirates. The network transported oil to China on behalf of Iran's Armed Forces General Staff and a front company, which Treasury sanctioned back in November 2023. Treasury also sanctioned a shadow fleet and associated management companies that helped ship Iranian oil to China. Iran has used the proceeds from all these oil sales to fund its nuclear weapons program, produce ballistic missiles, and support its regional terror proxies. We're back to max pressure, if you haven't heard, and the Trump administration wants to drive these oil revenues down through its revived sanctions campaign. And so far, so good. Iran's currency plummeted to a record low after President Trump signed his maximum pressure order on Tuesday. More of that, please. Headline 2, President Trump signed an executive order yesterday sanctioning the International Criminal Court, the ICC, for targeting Israel and the United States. The executive order includes sanctions and visa restrictions. The restrictions apply to certain ICC officials and family members who've helped the ICC investigate U.S. citizens or U.S. allies. The House of Representatives already voted to impose sanctions on the ICC, but it failed to pass in the Senate. On his first day back in office, President Trump reversed a Biden-era executive order that terminated sanctions against the ICC personnel involved in investigating American troops for possible war crimes in Afghanistan. Trump himself had imposed those sanctions during his first term and almost immediately reinstated the sanctions upon his return to the Oval Office on January 20th. That reversal paved the way for yesterday's executive order. So if you're feeling a bit of whiplash, you're not alone. America's adversaries are as well. Headline 3, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz told the IDF to plan for the voluntary exodus of Palestinians from Gaza. Yesterday, Katz posted on X that he instructed the IDF to devise a plan that will allow any Palestinians who want to leave Gaza to leave. Where to? To any country that's willing to accept them. Katz said that the Israeli plan will include options for exiting Gaza by land, air, and sea. Katz called out Ireland, Spain, and Norway. Those countries joined South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Katz claimed that the European trio are legally obligated to take in civilians from Gaza. If the Irish, Spanish, or Norwegian governments refuse, well, that would mean that they want the Palestinians to remain in a war zone where they claim these war crimes are taking place. Of course, those charges are spurious, but Katz just put them in a catch-22. Katz also mentioned Canada, a country which he noted has structured immigration programs and has previously expressed willingness to welcome Palestinians from Gaza. See what they do. And bonus headline 4, French President Emmanuel Macron invited interim Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, otherwise known as Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, to France. This would be al-Shara's first visit to Europe. Macron extended the invitation during a phone call on Wednesday. The call was the first between al-Jolani and a European head of state. Macron's office said that al-Jolani himself took the initiative to call him. Macron and al-Shara discussed the need to continue fighting terrorism, which is a truly bizarre topic to raise with a guy long associated with al-Qaeda. Macron also expressed his hope that Syria's interim leaders will operate in accordance with the aspirations of the Syrian people. Macron also relayed his intention to lift sanctions on Syria. That, I must say, strikes me as entirely premature. All right, let's dive into that interview with Representative Jared Moskowitz. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs and Judiciary Committees. He's got a terrific grasp of the Middle East, and he's been taking concrete action in Congress to forge a better future for the region and the U.S. by extension. Let's hear from him right now, right here on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Congressman Jared Moskowitz.
Good morning.
All right, well, congratulations. You were recently appointed ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Oversight and Intelligence. So that means you're going to oversee the State Department and the implementation of key foreign policies. So what priorities in the Middle East are top of your mind right now?
Well, obviously, right, nothing is happening in a vacuum. The Middle East is the talk of D.C. today. But obviously, we got to look at it holistically. We have to look at what's happening in the Middle East, the current situation, trying to get the remaining of the hostages out, and then obviously what the future of Gaza and Israel is going to look like, along with trying to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords or Abraham Accord-like agreement. Also denuclearizing Iran. I think we need to have that program dismantled. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. Whether the Iranians dismantle that program on their own or there is a military solution to dismantle their program, I think remains to be seen. I'm also deeply worried about China and Russia. Obviously, China with Taiwan, Russia with Ukraine, but also China's reach into Latin America and into Africa based on the Belt and Road Initiative and the amount of money they've spent. And so, look, there's been a lot of talk about the State Department over the last couple of days, specifically USAID. And so that's something I'm gonna get involved with and sink my teeth into, because we cannot contract foreign aid at this moment. Understand that doesn't mean that there aren't programs that shouldn't be examined. That doesn't mean that there isn't money that can be saved or programs that are no longer necessary. But if we remove foreign aid, understand every dollar we take out, China's coming with $2. And when we want to know why China controls the United Nations, it's because we will have, taken all of our resources away from the State Department. And so, This is a conversation I look forward to working with Corey Mills, who's the chair of that subcommittee, and obviously Brian Mast is the new chair of the full Foreign Affairs Committee. And so I look forward to working with my colleagues, in that area.
All right. Well, let me pull on that Iran thread for a minute. I know that obviously Iran remains a top priority for the Pentagon. The Houthis, until recently, were attacking U.S. military vessels in the Red Sea. American bases over the last year and a half have been targeted by those militias based in Iraq and Syria that are aligned with Iran. Weapons and cash from Tehran continue to empower terror proxies like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and Hamas to the extent that it even exists any longer. How would you address the threat of Iran in the region? And I guess the real question is, what should Congress do to target Iran and its proxies?
Well, I think right now we should keep the pressure on Iran. I mean, there's no doubt that they've been weakened. Both Hamas and Hezbollah, their two proxies, are at their weakest points in decades. And Iran itself has suffered losses to their air defense system. And so Iran is at a very weak point. And so that's why now is the time for maximum pressure on Iran to dismantle their nuclear program. I think that should be the policy. I really think Donald Trump should come out and say Iran has 90 days to dismantle their nuclear program. Well, obviously, that needs to happen with tremendous transparency in the international community. But should Iran not dismantle their nuclear program, then Trump, America, and the Israelis are going to come in and dismantle the program for them. All options are on the table. I really think that needs to be the position of the United States at the moment. As far as the Houthis, I was involved, obviously, making sure that they were deemed a terrorist organization. The United States has been attacking Houthi targets, degrading their capabilities. I think you're going to see that probably continue in the new administration. The Biden administration was doing that. I think you're going to continue to see the Trump administration do that as well, because we have to make sure that these passages are opened. Again, China, very involved in this area. China's making sure that they have control over all of these passages in the Middle East for shipping and things of that nature, that you can loop in the Panama Canal to that conversation. That's the Belt and Road Initiative there. That's a real thing that's going on in Panama, but it's not just Panama. It's at all these choke points around the world where China has their influence as a result of the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Belt and Road Initiative is, again, China coming in and building infrastructure projects with their money, with Chinese labor, and owning them, and then basically allowing use of these areas to countries. And that's how they're controlling the geopolitics of that region through the Belt and Road Initiative. And so, that's what I'm looking for in both those, on the Houthi issue and on the Iran issue, is maximum pressure on both.
Yeah, fully agree, and like to see that evolve. I want to pivot to another Iran proxy, and that's Hamas. We know that Hamas and Israel recently exchanged hostages for prisoners. And the goal right now is to get as many of those hostages out as we know. But we're going to be watching hundreds of convicted terrorists, many serving life sentences for murder and other crimes, released as part of this deal. So I think my question here then is, what do you think of the deal in its current form? And how should the U.S. support Israel in returning those remaining hostages?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the deal is complicated. But, the number one goal has to be getting the hostages home. That has to be the number one goal, is getting the hostages out, getting them home. And then the second goal, obviously, is getting the bodies returned of the hostages that are no longer alive. Those are the two goals here. There's no doubt that to get that, Israel is giving up Palestinian prisoners. And we've seen, by the way, recent history would show when you do that. Yahya Sinwar was given, the guy who was the mastermind of the October 7th attacks. He was a prisoner in jail, and he was released as part of a prisoner swap for an Israeli soldier. And that's what got us October 7th. In this instance, I think because all of the old rules, all of the old ways of doing things are over, I'm not as concerned. What I mean by that is Hamas is going to be no more. Hamas is not going to be involved in any situation in the Gaza Strip. And so, what's going to happen here with these release of the Palestinian prisoners is now unclear where all of this will go. I mean, President Trump, by the way, threw a It's unclear where Gaza is going, quite frankly, and how that's going to look, and how the international community is going to have to come in and be involved. I think that's what the president's doing, quite frankly. I think he's trying to shock the system to get the Arab community to step up in Gaza and in the future of Gaza. But Israel's going to have to look at this as a completely different way than we've looked at it for the last several decades, because it has not worked. And so, I'd rather these people not get out of jail, but at the same time, if it gets us back our hostages, we have no choice but to do that.
Complicated, to put it mildly. And adding to the complication, countries like Qatar were brought in to mediate hostage negotiations, but as we know, they've not exactly used their influence with Hamas to end the crisis. Meanwhile, Qatar continues to host prominent members of Hamas. I got to say, I mean, this is a country that's a state sponsor of terror, that's also an American ally. So what should the U.S. be doing to hold Qatar to account for its unwillingness to use its leverage with Hamas to enact meaningful concessions in these negotiations? Are we using any leverage? Should we be using any leverage here?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, Qatar was an integral part in getting to this deal. Should have we gotten here sooner? I mean, at the end of the day, Sinwar was, sitting in a bunker not wanting to make any deal. I don't know that you can make a crazy man make a deal. And so, look, while I wasn't happy with the speed of this, I do think the Qataris could have probably applied more pressure. It's better to have them as an ally than not. We have a big military presence, obviously, in Qatar. And what I would say is look at Turkey. Look what's going on with Turkey. They're a NATO ally. And so this is a region of the world that doesn't look like anywhere else. It's a tough block to live on. And some of our allies are going to be different. They're going to say different things. And it's sometimes we're not going to agree with the things that those allies say, and we'll condemn those things. But I think the new administration needs to be tougher, both with Turkey and with Qatar. And I look forward to that, hopefully. As far as, Qatar having influence with Hamas, that was kind of the plan, by the way. This was not something that happened by accident. It was kind of the plan that was hatched by multiple nations, including the United States, was to have Qatar have influence with Hamas. Whether that paid off doesn't seem like so, because apparently Hamas on the ground decided to go in a completely different direction than the Hamas unit that was in Qatar. And so you could look at back and say, well, that was a completely failed strategy, which it was. It did not keep Hamas at bay. In fact, it allowed them to build their capabilities, which they then launched the October 7th attack. So that was obviously a failure all around. On a go-forward basis, Qatar is going to have to be involved, in my opinion, as is UAE and the Saudis and others, the Jordanians and the Egyptians, on what we're going to do with the Palestinians in Gaza. What kind of government will we form? What kind of quasi place will they have? That's just very unclear at the moment. But I do think what is clear is that the United States is changing its policy and is going to demand that the Arab countries step up more and make this more of their problem than just the problem of the United States or the Israelis.
I do think there's an interesting question to be answered about whether the Qataris or the Hamas-based or the Qatari-based Hamas members were at odds with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, or whether it was coordinated. But I guess that's something that at some point, someday, maybe we'll learn about this. Last question here.
Well, by the way, I don't mean to interrupt, but they're both dead now, right? So
they're mostly dead, right? There are still some
they both suffered the same fate, whether that was in an apartment complex in Iran or in Gaza. So.
Yeah. Although there are still some leaders from both that are still around. But, this could be academic at some point. We just may not know. Last question for you before I let you go here. You played a leadership role, in fact, in introducing and supporting the bipartisan U.S.-South Africa Review Act in the last Congress. That passed the House. What message do you have for South Africa with respect to Pretoria's really just concerning ties to malign actors like Iran, Russia, Hamas, China, and its actions pushing the International Court of Justice's case against Israel? What's the policy there?
Well, our policy is shifting on South Africa. I think it's clear they're a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chinese and the Russians. They've taken a lot of that money, and they own the South African regime at the moment. There's just no question about that. You're seeing them do joint military exercises with these people. They're the one who did this ICC thing. China and Russia wanted, South Africa, where, you had apartheid there for a long period of time, to be the face of that movement, even though the United States is not a party to the ICC. Israel's not a party to the ICC. And by the way, the ICC never did anything with, Assad, even though he gassed his own people and killed 300,000+ of his own people. There was no, criminal court actions then. And so, you've seen Israel be treated differently. It's completely a double, triple, quadruple standard. It's clearly anti-Semitic. And South Africa has decided to get used by their Chinese and Russian friends. That's going to have implications now with their relationship with the United States. And so we cannot let that go. We have to be extremely tough on anybody who's picking a side in this proxy stuff that's going on between the United States, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Gotta say, love that. Love what's, love what we're seeing percolating right now in Congress with regard to South Africa. We see them here at FDD as enablers of Hamas and a number of other bad actors, including China, as you mentioned, including Iran, including Russia. So keep up the great work on that front and all the other fronts. I want to thank you, Congressman Jared Moskowitz, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Appreciate it.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. FDD senior research analyst Natalie Ekenau is out with a policy brief on Qatar's complicity in Hamas terrorism. The Qataris have been funneling obscene amounts of cash to the terror group while attempting to play mediator. Natalie highlights America's previous failures to address Doha's malign activity, and she underscores that the Trump administration has an opportunity to finally hold this tiny Gulf nation accountable for enabling Iran-backed terror. My colleague Rich Goldberg appeared on Dan Senor's Call Me Back podcast to discuss Trump's recent press conference where he threatened to take over Gaza and relocate its 2 million Palestinian residents to other countries. Rich breaks down Trump's intentions and explores what the region could look like if the plan were actually to be implemented. There's one thing both the right and left can agree on right now. It's that the Donald is a disruptor. Finally, FDD chief executive Mark Dubowitz teamed up with FDD senior analyst Ben Cohen for a piece in the New York Post exposing the flawed USAID. The pair argued that this moment presents a critical opportunity for Trump to overhaul USAID from the ground up, ensuring that its valuable work continues in countries like Ukraine while ending its support for terror sympathizers once and for all. And that's a wrap, folks. I, again, encourage you to check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Please do read our quick takes on X at FDD and watch those videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. And as always, you can make that tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Monday for another episode. I'll be speaking with Josh Hammer, a political commentator and columnist who serves as senior editor-at-large for Newsweek. It's certainly been a newsy week, so I'm looking forward to speaking with him about current events, but also about his new book. So I hope to see you Monday for that one. Oh, and if news breaks on Sunday, don't expect me to chime in. The Philadelphia Eagles, you may have heard, are in the Super Bowl. And as you probably know by now, I'm a son of Philadelphia. So go Birds. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.